It is 7 o'clock. Good to have your company this morning. Planes, trains and automobiles. The government is unveiling how it plans to decarbonise the transport sector as it attempts to meet the 2050 net zero target. We'll be asking the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps about that in just a moment. Also coming up, a capital cover-up. And the Mayor of London is making face masks mandatory on public transport after the 19th of July. But will commuters take any notice? We'll be putting that to the government. Plus, we're also joined by Sadiq Khan at 7:30. Also, this programme. Teenage globetrotter at 9:45. I'll be speaking to 18-year-old Travis Ludlow, who's just become the youngest person to fly solo around the world. It is Wednesday, the 14th of July. The road to net zero transport. Sales of petrol and diesel HGVs to be banned by 2040, but questions over whether it's achievable and how it will be funded.
This proposal is unrealistic. Alternative HGVs don't yet exist. We don't know when they'll exist, and we don't know how much they'll cost.
A de facto amnesty. The government set to end prosecutions related to the Northern Ireland Troubles in a move opposed by people and parties on both sides. As Marcus Rashford thanks fans for their support after suffering racist abuse, a senior Conservative backbencher says the party needs to rethink its attitude to taking the knee. Some don't like it hot. Palm Springs sweats in California's heat wave, with one weather forecaster predicting climate change will force some drastic choices.
We're going to get away from the equators and start inhabiting the north. You know, if you're looking to invest in real estate, Greenland's a great place to look right now.
And for the UK and Ireland, it's also going to become increasingly warm, with some spots reaching heatwave criteria as we head into the weekend. I'll have the details for you later.
Morning all. The government is unveiling new plans to decarbonise the transport sector as it attempts to meet its target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Under the plans, the sale of new petrol or diesel HGVs will be banned by 2040, 10 years after the same ban comes into force for cars. But leaders in the haulage industry have criticised the proposal, saying it is unrealistic. Our climate change correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter has a first report.
Green energy, it's our future. Yeah, we can't rely on coal anymore or diesels.
Thomas has been driving trucks for a decade. He knows that transport is the UK's largest contributor to emissions and agrees that needs to change. But as part of its drive to decarbonise the sector, the government has announced there'll be no new diesel HGVs sold after 2040. A big change at an uncertain time.
We are the most important chain in the entire distribution chain. Without us, there will be nothing on the shelves, nothing fresh on the shelves at the supermarket, no new shoes, no new jackets. I think we are very important.
The plan has left an industry still grappling with hydrogen and electricity as alternatives, feeling adrift.
This proposal is unrealistic. Alternative HGVs don't yet exist. We don't know when they'll exist, and we don't know how much they'll cost. And it's not clear what any transition will look like. So this is blue skies thinking, way ahead of real-life reality.
Trucking isn't the only industry affected by new targets.
The Department for Transport is also pledging to get domestic aviation carbon emissions down to net zero by 2040. That's 10 years earlier than previously promised. But the decarbonisation of our world isn't straightforward. And when it comes to planes, for example, the technology used to make them greener is still very much in development, and it's expensive.
In fact, money seems to be the key issue here. The government criticised for producing policy without a plan yet to help pay for it.
Unless we see action now from the Treasury and from Rishi Sunak, the Decarbonising Transport Plan and any plan on climate that comes over the coming weeks won't deliver what it needs to.
The Transport Secretary thinks otherwise.
Of course, long-term decisions about how the roads are paid for are matters for the Treasury. That's not what we're addressing today. But what we are doing is launching a plan which is quite literally world-beating amongst major economies.
That may be true, but this roadmap contains a series of big gambles that the markets, consumers, technology and the government's own purse string holders will all deliver as we march towards net zero. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News, Heathrow.
Very pleased to say we're joined once again on the programme by the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. Mr Shapps, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Do take us through the plans. I mean, you heard Hannah Thomas-Peter there in a report pointing out the fact that some are suggesting that what it amounts to are a series of significant gambles on the part of the government. I suspect you disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big challenge. There's no doubt about that at all. And I know that the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, something that sounds a bit dull, but actually this is the most far-reaching, profound changes we will have ever seen to our transport network. And it's a plan which is more ambitious than anything that's been set out by any major economy in the world. What I'd say is I think that by getting there first, by doing these, making these decisions, setting the path now, we can give ourselves an example for the future. And we've already been doing that by, for example, saying that there'd be an end to sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030 and completely by 2035, even the hybrids. And in doing so, we've ended up seeing those big announcements about jobs in Ellesmere Port for Vauxhall and in Sunderland for Nissan in the last week or so, building gigafactories, bringing the green jobs to the UK. So I think there's a big advantage to sort of getting out there first and setting out in considerable detail, which is what this plan does today.
It is perhaps, though, Minister, the reason that no one else has gone as far as this government is because a lot of what you're talking about is as yet impossible. I mean, you heard the Road Haulage Association in Hannah's report pointing out the fact you want to move away from diesel and petrol HGVs. The problem is, of course, we don't have any alternatives to diesel or petrol HGVs currently.
Yes, I should point out that the bigger of the logistics organisations, Logistics UK, who also deal with the haulier sector, says that the plan provides confidence and clarity. So I think actually it is true to say that not all the technology is there at the moment. But if you look at the total CO2, carbon produced by transport in 2019, 90% of it came from the roads and 70% of that came from cars and vans. And the cars and vans part of it, the technology is already there. Lots of people already drive electric vehicles. 1 in 7 cars sold this year had a plug on the end of it, essentially. So, we've already got large parts of the technology. Undeniably, we need the technology for the rest, and we're investing in lots of different research to make sure that we can have sort of carbon-free travel for the HGVs, for coaches, for lorries, for buses, and then for other forms of transport, including maritime, including aviation, where the work is actually already very much advanced.
Sure, but wouldn't it also be advantageous to take advantage of the powers that are within your grasp at the moment, sorting out, for example, the fact that currently, train trips are still 50% more expensive than flying on the same route. We know that local authorities, in terms of investment in local bus services, we've seen that diminish over the past few years. I mean, there are a lot of things that we can do to get people out of their cars, out of petrol guzzlers and onto public transport, but we don't seem so keen.
There's lots of things we can do, but we're massively keen. I must have missed you that morning, but I came on the programme on Sky and announced the Bus Back Better, which is our plan for buses. It's a £3 billion bus plan, which does exactly what you've just said, which is to get people onto the bus network. Just a few weeks ago, I launched Great British Railways as a concept which will bring our railways together and enable much better, clearer transport for people, more efficiently run trains, more on time, and so on and so forth. So I agree entirely. These other forms of transport, and public transport in particular, need to be really attractive so we can get people onto those forms of transport. And we've already made some very big, very significant announcements in that area. This transport decarbonisation plan today is first of all, a large document, as you might expect,
Yeah.
which talks about all of the different aspects, but it's also then supported by 9 different technical documents and consultations into all areas of transport, with the idea that we become the fastest decarbonising transport economy in the world, with all the jobs that can provide, as we've seen in Ellesmere Port and in Sunderland just in the last week or so.
Let's talk COVID-19 for a few moments, if we can, Minister. And you'll obviously be aware of this. Sadiq Khan, Transport for London, announcing this morning that the wearing of masks will remain mandatory on the tube and on bus networks in London. What do you make of that? I suppose you must disagree with it.
No, I was on either your programme or Sky just at the end of the last week, saying that whilst we're going from this being a legal requirement to guidelines, we do expect individual carriers, the transport organisations, to make sure that they are putting in place whatever's appropriate for their network.
But why would it be appropriate to wear a mask on a bus in London, but not to wear a mask on a train leaving London? So
sure. So if you think about it, the airlines, for example, have already said, without any fuss, as far as I saw, that you'll need to carry on wearing masks on those. I said last week it will be a condition of carriage for various different transport organisations, of which TfL, which tend to have crowded commuter trains, may well, I actually said this, they may well want to have it as a condition of carriage. So it's very much in line with what we expected, even wanted to happen. On the other hand, if you're on a long distance train, you're the only person in a carriage, it's late in the evening or something, there's clearly no real point in wearing a mask. We didn't want to say that you're breaking the law by not wearing a mask in a situation where there's absolutely no advantage in wearing that mask. So this is very much what we expected, anticipated and said should and would happen. So if you travel on an empty bus to come into Skye in the morning, I should be able to get on that bus without wearing a mask? So it depends on what that transport organisation says. So if in Transport for London, they're saying I should wear that mask. So should I wear it? Yes, should I not wear it? If the conditions of carriage to get on that bus are you must have a mask on, then of course you must wear a mask. It's pretty straightforward. But there's no point. It's pretty straightforward. It's also fairly inconsistent, though, isn't it, Minister? Well, we are moving away from everything is set in law. I know we've got very used to it the last year and a half, to a situation where we say, you now take either responsibility personally, or in this case, you'll be told by the organisation that you are stepping into or stepping onto in this case. But there may be other occasions where people are asked to wear masks because they're being in a confined area. And that's quite right. That's the point of the 4th stage of the unlock, which takes place next Monday. And it will mean that responsibility starts to return to people and to organisations, which is absolutely right, because we are going through that unlock stage very cautiously. I do want to kind of reflect on what we saw at the weekend at Wembley and the events of the past couple of days, and the introspection that appears to be going on within your party at the moment about whether or not actions, words by some of your colleagues may have contributed to the racism that England's footballers experience. I mean, do you agree with your colleague Steve Baker when he says, much as we can't be associated with calls to defund the police, we urgently need to challenge our own attitude to people taking the knee? Do you agree with him? I think it's really simple. I mean, racism is abhorrent. We never want to see it in society. We want to make sure that it is, kicked out, recognised in all of its forms. And, I thought our England players clearly did a brilliant job. And I think, we should always cheer them. I would take issue with anybody who says that we shouldn't do everything possible to get rid of racism. And that's exactly what's happened. I thought that the comments about Priti Patel were unusual or odd because, Priti Patel has spoken very movingly in the House of Commons about her own experience suffering from racism. Indeed, she also referred to taking the knee as gesture politics. She also referred to taking the knee as gesture politics, a view which plenty of people in the public took and shared. And now you've got Steve Baker suggesting that you need to challenge the attitude within the party to taking the knee. Again, I'll ask the question, do you agree with Steve Baker that perhaps, calling it gesture politics wasn't the right thing to do? Well, my view is just very simple. I just think we should respect everybody and in whatever form they want to show that they are against racism is fine with me. And I think, actually, it's a shame because this is detracted from a phenomenal performance by the England team, who really got together and did England proud. And that's where I prefer to leave it. I mean, I think we should work, all of us, together in society, and start by accepting that nobody wants to see racism. And if you accept everybody is coming from the right approach and attitude in this, then we'll get a lot further as a country and actually, kicking out racism.
Can we at least get you to agree that perhaps we're past the point now where politicians need to stop telling footballers to stop commenting on politics?
Well, look, everyone, the great thing about living in a democracy is everybody is welcome to pitch in on this. I suppose a bit like everybody became armchair experts about what Gareth Southgate should do with his team over the match. I've got no
I think I'm sorry. I think the comparison there is slightly askew, isn't it? I mean, politicians footballers making statements about food banks and racism is slightly different from armchair, managers commenting on the England on the England team selection.
You're asking my attitude towards it. They're welcome to. I mean, we live in a free society. People should be able to comment on whatever they like. And I pay tribute to some of the campaigns which have raised awareness. And we live in a world where it doesn't matter if you're a footballer, a politician, a member of the public, everybody has a right to comment on politics. Thank goodness that's the world we live in.
Well, what would your advice then be to your colleague Andrew Rossendale, who did say, perhaps in response to Tyrone Ming's comment yesterday, that he should be focusing on football rather than politics?
Well, as I say, I think everybody can comment on politics. That's the whole spirit of a democracy, isn't it? I think it's the whole point of it. But what I would also say is, we are absolutely united as a government, and I hope as a country as well, booting out racism. We abhor it. In fact, as a cabinet, we're more ethnically diverse, I think, than any in history, as far as I can see. So I think we're more representative of the country in that regard, and it's a good thing. And I hope we can move on rather united on this issue, because who wants to live in a racist country? Not me.
Indeed, and neither I. But I do wonder, I understand it is a country mile away from your brief. There was that meeting with the tech giants, between the Prime Minister and the tech giants yesterday. Look, Instagram still seems to view monkey emojis, telling people to go home as not racist. What concrete action is the government going to be taking about this as regards to the social media companies? Yeah,
I mean, of course it's racist to post or allow those sort of things to stay online. We're introducing the Online Harms Bill, and that's going to have a maximum fine of 10% of an organisation's global turnover. So this is a huge potential fine. I know the Prime Minister had the social media companies in yesterday and was very clear with them. They are very bright companies. They're brilliant at producing algorithms and tech and doing remarkable things. They need to be monitoring their networks a heck of a lot more clearly to make sure that they're dealing with this racist abuse, which, as I say, the Online Harms Bill will cost them dearly if they don't.
Minister, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
Well, within the past few minutes, the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, has released the monthly inflation rate for June. Let's speak to our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who will have a view on all of this. So what are we learning and what does it mean, Ed?
Well, inflation, of course, it's the measure of just how fast prices are rising around the economy. Very important because, aside from anything else, that's what the Bank of England needs to try and keep to around 2%. And the faster the economy is growing, often that pushes prices higher, and that will cause some consternation at the Bank of England. And for the second month running, inflation has risen higher than expected. Let me just show you what we're talking about here. This line here shows you inflation. So again, just the rise or indeed the change in prices over the previous year. You can see it was very low in 2015, kind of round about zero. But then inflation has risen relatively sharply. And just recently, you can see it going down very sharply when it came to the pandemic. Obviously, that reflects the fact that people are spending less in the shops, and then rising very quickly over the last few months, up to above 2% last time around. That was in May, But now have a look at what happened this time around, up to 2.5% in June. That was higher than economists had expected and puts it quite comfortably above the Bank of England's 2% target. In terms of what's pushing it up, well, have a look at this. This breaks down different parts of inflation, and obviously there's a lot there, but let me just kind of show you a few of the highlights. Transport costs, and that includes petrol prices, up quite sharply. Restaurants and hotels, so people starting to go out again, spending more. Perhaps you've noticed that yourselves. That's also gone up quite a lot as well, as have food and drinks as well. So you're putting up, you're seeing those prices kind of going up really across most categories. And as a result of that, that's pushing up prices. The big question now is what the Bank of England thinks about that. Of course, you're seeing high prices around the world. Do they look at it and say, well, we need to think about what we're doing with interest rates? Or do they say, look, for the time being, we think this is going to pass and we can leave interest rates at that very low level where they are?
Ed, many thanks indeed. Now, the government is poised to announce a statute of limitations, effectively ending all prosecutions related to the Northern Ireland Troubles. It's been driven by a commitment to end cases involving former British soldiers, but the de facto amnesty will also apply to former paramilitaries. The move is opposed by all 5 political parties in Northern Ireland, the Irish government, and victims on all sides, as our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins reports.
The people who murdered my husband are still walking free. I could be walking past them up the town any day and not know who it was.
It's 30 years since the IRA murdered Kathleen's husband, Patsy. He and 5 soldiers were killed when they chained him to a van containing a bomb, held his family at gunpoint and ordered him to drive it into a military base. She's never seen justice, but won't accept an amnesty.
Well, I feel robbed. I feel robbed of the whole thing because I just feel that I have this thing in my head that when it's an important person that's been killed, there are things investigated and there are things solved and all the rest of it, and we're just the ordinary common people, so it's all right to push us to the one side.
13 people were shot dead when the Parachute Regiment opened fire in Londonderry. The case against the only veteran charged with murder, Soldier F, has been halted. The family of one of his alleged victims say a statute of limitations on prosecutions only adds to the pain of Bloody Sunday.
We were just walking along just across the road there when we turned round. We were trying to skip the effects of the gas. I remember turning around and I saw the Paris coming in.
Do you think the government has made a decision then without any serious consideration of the views of victims on any side?
I can't really be sure on that, but what I do know, I don't trust the British government.
Why not?
Well, would you trust them if they murdered your brother and told lies about him?
Last time I met him.
With the government proposing a de facto amnesty for veterans and former terrorists, victims like Kathleen feel they're asking too much of those who have already paid the highest price.
The worst day that I can remember was the day of my daughter's wedding, because her daddy should have been there to walk her up the aisle. And I cannot say ever, and never will say, that I can forgive the people who took Patsy away from me and his kids. I loved Patsy to the minute he died, from the first time I met him.
David Blevins, Sky News, in Derry.
Still to come on the programme, with more than 70 people now killed in the unrest in South Africa. I'll be speaking to Ralph Matega from the University of the Western Cape at 2:15. At 8:20, we'll be hearing from the man who was the UK's first National Security Advisor, Lord Ricketts, and discuss yesterday's vote cutting foreign aid. At 9:15, we'll meet Elise Downing, who became the first woman and the youngest person to run around the coast of Britain after struggling with her mental health. Some of the day's other news now. And Welsh ministers are set to announce later whether there will be changes to the country's COVID restrictions. First Minister Mark Drakeford will follow England and Scotland in announcing his government's plans for lifting the rules. The latest data from Public Health Wales shows the COVID case rate in Wales is 136 per 100,000 people. That's below other UK nations and all English regions. Demonstrators have gathered in Miami and Washington in support of protesters in Cuba. They're calling for President Miguel Diaz-Canel to resign amidst countrywide restrictions on social media and messaging platforms, and for the US president to offer more support to the country. It comes after widespread protests on Sunday against Cuba's economic crisis and its handling of the pandemic. England defender Harry Maguire has revealed that his father suffered suspected broken ribs and was left struggling to breathe after ticketless fans breached the security at Wembley before the Euro 2020 final. Maguire told the Sun newspaper that what happened was scary and added that his family will be more aware when attending games in future. Well, yesterday, UEFA opened a disciplinary investigation into the incidents at Wembley. There's been sweltering temperatures across California as a heatwave, widely blamed on climate change, has a firm grip on America's largest state and shows no signs of easing. Well, last month was the hottest June ever in North America. And dozens of wildfires continue to burn across the West Coast, with the two largest in northeastern California and southern Oregon. Fires in neighbouring states are threatening California's power grids, and energy operators have asked residents to conserve electricity to avoid outages. Over the weekend, Palm Springs in Southern California hit a record high temperature of 49 degrees Celsius, where our US correspondent Greg Milam sent this report.
109 today, not bad, especially considering that we were 120 in Palm Springs on Saturday.
The weather forecasters do it in Fahrenheit in America. 120 is 48 Celsius. However you measure it, even for the desert city of Palm Springs, it's extreme.
And it was 130 in Death Valley, so...
Mike Everett's been reporting record temperatures for days, and the hottest June ever here. He sees drastic choices ahead.
It's climate change, pure and simple. Places like this may become uninhabitable, at least in the summertime. When you talk about the potential for 130-degree heat for prolonged periods of time, people will just move, will migrate. Very similar to like we did at the beginning of mankind. We're going to get away from the equators and start inhabiting the north. You know, if you're looking to invest in real estate, Greenland's a great place to look right now.
For now, it means adapting. Carlos has shifted his work to earlier in the day when it's at least a bit cooler.
Living out here in general, the people, everybody kind of has already acclimated to it, you know, and if we can't work in this heat, then we can't just stay at home, you know what I mean?
Do you feel it's getting hotter though?
Definitely, yeah.
It feels like what the scientists warn of, more frequent and intense heat waves, has already arrived. Patrick and Ryan have just moved to Palm Springs.
It does seem to be getting hotter. The waves that we've had more recently are much earlier in the year than typical. We won't get this hot until around August sometimes, or maybe September in previous years. So having that...
And they're not as prolonged. Like
right.
These heat waves, usually they're like 3 or 4 days, and now we've been getting these high pressure systems that last for a week. Like this current one we're in, we're like day 3 of 9. So it's going to be this intense for a while.
And across the west, with drought and heat come the fires, this year getting bigger, earlier than usual. There isn't a fire season anymore, it's year-round. California is a place that's led the way in the move towards renewable energy, and its inhabitants are on the front line when it comes to the dramatic effects of climate change. Here, where they idolize the star of the movie, Some Like It Hot. How much more will anyone be able to stand? Greg Milam, Sky News, Palm Springs in California.
Well, for much more related news, don't forget the Daily Climate Show. That's on Sky News every weekday, 6:30 and 9:30. Time now to see how the weather is looking domestically, and it is starting to get hotter. Naz standing by. How hot could it get today around the country?
Well, it's going to be, very warm today across many areas. We could easily see temperatures in the early to mid-20s. But as we head into the weekend, for some spots, we could also reach heat wave criteria here in the UK and Ireland.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning to you. So, fine and dry, all in all, for many parts of the UK and Ireland for the rest of this week. We're going to see plenty of sunshine. The warmth will be building. It's going to feel hot as we head into the weekend, with some spots reaching heatwave criteria. Until then, a couple of days of nuisance cloud to contend with. This morning, eastern areas quite cloudy and murky with a little bit of drizzle, some showers across western Scotland, otherwise mainly dry and bright. And there will be lots of sunshine this afternoon for most of Scotland, England and Wales. Eastern areas will see that cloud melt away, but it may take some time for East Anglia to brighten up, but it will eventually. However, across Ireland, Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, a weak front approaching, bringing cloudier skies and some patchy drizzle.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still to come, we'll be asking London's Mayor Sadiq Khan why he's keeping mask wearing mandatory on public transport in the city. Coming soon. Welcome back. In the last few minutes, the Transport Secretary told the programme that the government expects and even wants different companies and travel networks to adopt different rules on masks after the 19th of July. On Monday in England, the legal requirement for masks will be dropped, but the Mayor of London will keep the requirement for masks on public transport in and around the capital. Grant Shapps says there is no issue with rules differing in different places.
I said last week, it will be a condition of carriage for various different transport organisations, of which TfL, which tend to have crowded commuter trains, may well, I actually said this, they may well want to have it as a condition of carriage. So it's very much in line with what we expected, even wanted to happen. On the other hand, if you're on a long distance train, you're the only person in a carriage, you know, it's late in the evening or something, there's clearly no real point in wearing a mask. We didn't want to say that it's you know, you're breaking the law by not wearing a mask in a situation where there's absolutely no advantage in wearing that mask. So this is very much what we expected, anticipated and said should and would happen. If the conditions of carriage to get on that bus are you must have a mask on, then of course you must wear a mask. It's pretty straightforward.
Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen. Straightforward it may be, but it occurs to me that there are perhaps lots of people travelling alone late at night on trains. The Prime Minister mentioned that example. Stephen Barclay mentioned it yesterday, and now the Transport Secretary. But there is a degree of, well, confusion.
Yes, there is, because we're now in a situation where mask wearing in England will no longer be compulsory. But it will be a condition of carriage on the underground. So if you're getting your underground, you have to wear your mask, or the tube or the bus. And then you might go to Euston Station and get a mainline train where you don't have to wear your mask, although it's encouraged if it's busy. But if you're getting that train to Wales, you will have to wear a mask, because there it remains the law, although there are going to be further announcements there later this week. So you've got to try and keep a handle on the different rules in different places. And still many shops are unclear about whether they can say, you don't have to wear a mask from Monday as well. I think a lot of people would say, why don't they just keep them compulsory, because that would make things simpler. The government's feeling was that they didn't want to stick with these rigid rules on masks, but certainly the impression you get from some Conservative MPs is that while they don't like it, the public seem to support wearing masks. That's what the polls suggest, and that this may be somewhere where there will have to be a U-turn further down the line.
Tamara, for now, thanks very much. Well, let's turn our attention to the situation in London. The person who's announced the changes this morning, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, just a short walk away from where I'm standing. Good to see you this morning, Mayor. Thanks for being on the programme. Just if you can, explain the rationale behind the mandatory wearing of masks in transport in London.
Well, look, TfL is arguably one of the safest and cleanest transport authorities in the world. We're using world-class enhanced cleaning. We're using hospital-quality disinfectant. We've got more than 1,000 hand sanitisers. We're using UV light to make sure our escalators are safe. We're also asking Imperial College to come and make sure there's no COVID on public transport. They found no evidence of COVID in all the testing they've done. But I think after Monday, we should continue making it compulsory to wear a face mask on public transport, where often you can't keep your social distance. It adds an additional layer of protection, but also reassurance. The evidence we know from the government's own scientific advisors, the evidence from the World Health Organization, is you wearing a face mask makes it less likely that the virus can be passed on. It reduces transmission in an indoor space where you can't keep your distance. But also the Centre for Disease Control in the USA have now said, actually, on top of it being the most unselfish thing you can do, wearing a face mask may reduce the chances of you catching the virus. So for me, it's really important that we make sure public transport continues to be both safe but also reassuring.
How confident are you, though, that Londoners will heed the TfL guidance? I mean, the plural of anecdote is not evidence, of course, but my travels on public transport last week would certainly suggest that already, in the aftermath of the announcement about July the 19th, there are a lot of people choosing not to wear masks.
Yeah, that's why I was keen to come out today before Monday and make it clear what the expectation's going to be after Monday, which is a continuation of it being obligatory to wear a face mask when you're using transport in London. The good news is, from survey work we've done over the last year, roughly speaking, 86% of people using public transport in London are wearing face coverings, and of the 14% who aren't, about 2/3 are either exempt or have a good reason. My message to anybody, not just in London, but those visiting our cities, it is going to be compulsory still from next Monday to wear a face cover. And actually, you know what, it's the most unselfish thing you can do. It means that there's less chance if you've got the virus, and by the way, 1 out of 3 people who've got the virus won't show any symptoms, it reduces the chance of you passing it on.
Is there going to be robust enforcement of this? Are we going to see bus drivers kicking people off buses, not letting them on in the first place, TfL employees being asked to confront people at train stations? Or is this simply just a statement of intent? If the Mayor of London says, wear your masks on public transport, there is a greater likelihood that people will wear masks on public transport.
Well, I've examined over the last year what's been going on in London, and roughly speaking, there have been 212,000 conversations between TfL enforcement officers and members of the public. By and large, members of the public put on their face mask, it's in their pocket or their purse, they've forgotten, it's not quite covering their nose, or sometimes they'll go to the shop and get one before they get on a bus or a network. Actually, there's only been 4,000 fixed penalty notices issued. So what you're going to be seeing from Monday is we've got hundreds of TfL enforcement officers. They'll be there to make sure people are following the rules. But if you come to a station or you want to go on a bus and you haven't got a face covering, you may not be allowed on without a face covering unless you're exempt. If you're on one of our trains, tubes, buses, Docklands Light Railway, overground trains, TfL rail, and you're seen not to have a face mask and you've not got a good reason and you aren't exempt, you'll be asked to leave.
So can I just to dwell on this topic just for a second? I think there's around about 400 TfL enforcement officers. As you say, thousands of penalties have been issued. I think just a little bit less than 5,000. That strikes me, that's one a month over the past year for each of those enforcement officers. Are we going to see more penalty notices handed out?
I hope not, because you know what the evidence is Londoners and those visiting our city have done the right thing, and not just the huge sacrifices made over the last 16 months, but over the last 12 months, making the right choice to wear a face mask without the need for enforcement to take place. But if there is a need for greater enforcement, if there's a need for more TfL enforcement officers, we'll look into that. At the same time, we're exploring making this a bylaw. That will mean we can use both the police service in London, but also British Transport Police. But, you know, the evidence I've seen is people doing the right thing. You know, Brits and Londoners get it, and they want to be unselfish. They want to avoid the chance, minimise the chance of them passing the virus on. But also they're well aware that amongst us there are people with clinical vulnerabilities. There are some of us whose immunity is suppressed. We don't want them to be not being able to use an essential service like public transport. And so I'm confident Londoners and those visiting our city will do the right thing.
I want to talk about what happened in and around Wembley in just a second, but perhaps we could focus on what followed the football on Sunday. And you know, Tyrone Mings and others actually within the England setup have suggested that perhaps people, including the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, fuelled the fire in terms of the racist abuse that they received. I'm sure that in the past you may well have in private referred to the Conservatives as the nasty party. I'm just wondering whether you think they're a racist party.
Well, let me be quite clear. One of the reasons why the likes of Marcus Rashford, Raheem Sterling and others felt so strongly about Black Lives Matter and supported the movement was to say no to racism. And one of the reasons why the likes of Harry Maguire, Harry Kane and others supported their colleagues when it came to taking the knee was to show solidarity in their fight against racism. And I think when people boo that, boo their own team, it begs the question about some of their motives. And to not condemn booing of our players taking the knee, to not condemn that, I think, doesn't bode well. But also, you know what? Harry Kane's not a Marxist. Harry Maguire doesn't want to defund the police. These are colleagues showing solidarity to their black mates in the squad. And I'm really proud of the squad. I'm really proud of Gareth Southgate. I'm really proud of the team. And those who have been hurling racist abuse online, on the stands or on the streets should be disgusted. And I'm sure the police will be taking action.
In terms, though, of what we saw at Wembley and indeed what we saw in the West End, Cameron McIntosh complaining about the Wyndham Theatre, requiring, essentially millions of pounds worth of repairs because of the behaviour of fans. Why do we keep hearing so many people say that they have full confidence in Cressida Dick's running of the Metropolitan Police?
Well, the responsibility for the fans in Leicester Square, in Liverpool Street, outside Wembley Stadium, in parts of London, lies with the hooligans. And it's really important that they're held to account. More than 86 arrests already been made. 19 of our police officers were injured. And the police are going through both CCTV footage, are going through body-worn videos, are looking at the evidence, and more charges will be brought because the sort of hooliganism you saw on Sunday isn't acceptable, and it's really important they're brought to book.
But there are no questions about Cressida Dick's continuing as head of the Met?
Well, no, she's got almost a year left of her contract. She's got my full confidence. It's for the Commissioner to decide whether she wants a second term. Let's cross that bridge when it comes to it. But it's really important that we support the police in relation to catching those criminals responsible for this sort of behaviour on Sunday. As far as I'm concerned, they're not real fans, and it's really important. If anybody's got any information about any hooligans on Sunday, they let the police know, because we want justice to happen.
Sadiq Khan, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Stay safe.
Now, a recent review of the Equality Act suggests that the UK's legislation lags behind other countries. The review board are calling for urgent reforms to policy surrounding race, disability, religion and sex. The Chief Executive of the Equality Act Review, Dr. Surya B, joins us now. Dr. B, great to see you this morning. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Just explain exactly in what ways the UK Equality Act is falling behind comparable countries.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. The Equality Act Review today publishes its report titled Equality Act 10 Years On. We have conducted the largest and the most comprehensive review of the Act in its 10-year history. Now, one of the findings that we put forward is that it lags behind, as you rightly said, other countries such as America, South Africa, Canada. Intersectionality, dual discrimination is one of the ways it lags behind. We as human beings are complex. We do not present as a single identity at a time. We are more than one identities often, but in our courts of law, we only can present one form of discrimination at a time. So, for example, I would not be able to argue that I have been discriminated against because I am a Muslim woman who is also of Kashmiri background. I have to argue those things individually. Another aspect of the Act that is lagging behind is the exclusivity of the Act. Its current protected characteristics are very narrow. They are mainly rooted in biology and ignore socioeconomic, social-cultural identity. Now, we have had a wealth of studies that have come forward regarding accent bias, regarding weight bias, regarding hair discrimination. A lot of students and employees are being sent home from work and school because there's a belief that the way their hair is worn, especially by Black persons, is not in line with uniform policy. So we ask for the Act to include new and added protected characteristics, but also to strengthen current protected characteristics, such as sex. The unfortunate, very sad murder of Sarah Everard earlier in the year, we saw misogyny becoming a hate crime. That's protection in the streets, but it does not yet translate as protection in the workplace.
Sure. Dr. Bayer, I don't want us to run out of time, but I do want to know whether or not your own personal experiences have informed your work on the Equality Act.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I was dismissed for raising a concern around 11-year-old children being shown a graphic video of people jumping to their deaths. I went to the employment tribunals. The judge ruled that it is not religious discrimination because a Jewish or a Christian woman would have been treated the same way. My argument was that no, they would not have been treated the same way. You need to look at context. You need to look at rising Islamophobia in the West and in the UK, and without a lot of the context surrounding discrimination against Muslims in particular, those experiences, that discrimination would not have been subjected to women or men of other faiths at this moment in time regarding a video to do with 9/11.
Dr. Sarabia, I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Most of Scotland, England and Wales will be dry with warm spells of sunshine today. However, Ireland, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland will become cloudier with some light rain and drizzle. With the mostly fine weather, pollen levels will be high or very high for all but the north of Scotland, where it will be moderate today. We're in the peak of the grass and spore pollen season, while nettle is at a medium risk.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
And I know that many of you will be watching from South Africa this morning. To those who are not there, well, you may not be aware, it is currently in the midst of its worst unrest since the end of apartheid. The area around the KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces have witnessed scenes of looting, firing and chaotic stampedes that have seen a death toll rise to more than 70 people. Over 1,200 arrests have also been made as the violence sparked by the jailing of the ex-president Jacob Zuma continues. Pleased to say we're joined now by Ralph Matega, a researcher at the University of the Western Cape. Ralph, thanks very much for joining us this morning. You will have heard me just a moment ago mention Jacob Zuma's name. To what extent, from your perspective, is this to do with his jailing?
Good morning and thanks for having me. The Jacob Zuma matter, of course, triggered what we have seen happening, the standoff between Jacob Zuma and the justice system, his supporters daring the justice system that his incarceration will result in the country becoming ungovernable. This is what triggered the whole thing. However, it needs to be noted that the scale at which this has happened and the intensity of this in the last few days goes beyond Jacob Zuma. It is about people also willing to partake in such kind of activities. And in my view, it goes also to the socio-economic conditions in the country that practically you do have young people available to participate in this, young people who come out as having nothing to lose immediately because of the socio-economic condition, because of a sense of disenchantment with the current system under the ANC now.
How has the ANC moved in this direction, moved so far in this direction? We understand, of course, that South Africa still has significant socio-economic problems, particularly in terms of the economy. And you have someone like Jacob Zuma accused and convicted of, behaviour in office unfit for a man of his position.
It's quite an irony that a struggle to support Mr. Zuma result in some looting, whereas he's actually accused of looting resources in the country. I mean, this is a cause that lacks any moral basis, and no doubt about it that you cannot expedite Mr. Zuma's situation any other way. The attempt is to try to pressure the court so that Mr. Zuma can be released. And this will put into jeopardy the principle of the rule of law in the country. And I think it also has to do with the ANC, the poor level of leadership, the declining credibility of the ANC as a political party, despite the fact that they won election, the credibility and the legitimacy to make decisions to rein in belligerent behavior in our society is quite a problem thereof. And also the decline of local leadership. All of these things are also happening because of just the decline of local leadership across communities, among communities in the country.
Ralph, in your mind, what are the chances of us seeing the frustration and indeed the violence and criminality spreading from KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng to other provinces in South Africa?
South Africans, majority of South Africans are not really interested in partaking in this. Majority of South Africans are not members of the ANC, and they see this as something that originates from within the ANC. And I think that is why in other provinces, communities have taken a position where they've said that we are not going to be part of this. We are not going to destroy prospect for jobs. We are not going to destroy the livelihood just because of one man. So we have seen this thing abating. It is actually being de-escalated this morning. And the bigger part of it is not because the army is out there that it is de-escalating. It is largely because of the communities taking their position and saying that not in our name. We are not going to allow this among our communities. In areas across the township, communities have come out. Last night, some stood in night vigil, actually protecting some of the shopping centers. That, I think, is bringing a huge effect in de-escalation of this.
Ralph, what does this mean for the future of the ANC and indeed for the future of South Africa?
I think South Africans are going to have to deeply think about the relationship that they have with the ANC. They are going to have to think about the future, and the future of the country might not involve the prominence of the ANC. I think that going into the next election, this is going to come to bear. A lot of people are quite angry towards the ANC. Young people are speaking on various television networks saying that this is all because of the ANC and it's not worth it. It is not a cause that is actually worth their efforts.
Ralph Matega, really good to speak to you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Great pleasure.
Time for the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. It is looking all in all fine for the rest of this week. We're going to see plenty of fine, dry weather, some good spells of sunshine, and it will be warming up for some spots. We could reach heat wave criteria as we head into the weekend from around Friday onwards. Until then, a couple of days of nuisance cloud to contend with. Eastern parts of the UK this morning, for example, rather cloudy and murky with some drizzly bits of rain, and across western parts of Scotland, a few showers there. Otherwise, mainly dry and bright and fairly muggy too. Now, there'll be plenty of sunshine this afternoon across Scotland, England and Wales, and to begin with across parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland, but it will turn increasingly cloudy across parts of the west of Ireland and Northern Ireland by around midday, and then further east as a weak front spreads its way eastwards, reaching western Scotland by this evening with some patchy light rain and drizzle. Elsewhere, warm and sunny.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.